when we're looking at an isometric, what we're actually seeing on the drawings that we've done so far are isometric drawings. So we're pretty much just copying what we see. And remember, this is always the front, this is always the right side, and this is always the top. And in an isometric drawing, this would actually be our start point here. You can start anywhere, but it's easiest I found, especially at the beginning of when you're drawing these, it's easiest to start from here, and that way you can actually see the isometric axes. So anything that's going back in the depth that we would see in the right side view is actually going to be at that 30-degree angle. And anything that's going to the left here that we would see in the front view, that would be a width dimension, is going back to the left and going to be at 30 degrees. And then anything that we see as a height dimension is going to go straight up and down. So if we were to color code things that we were actually going to see, just like we did in this picture where we have the yellow as the front and the green as the right side, we could color code our lines. So anything going back to the right would be an isometric line at 30 degrees in that direction. Okay? So this just gives you a perspective on how this happens. So all of these lines are going to go back towards the right, and they're going to be depth dimensions. And then anything that's going back towards the left would be these yellow, and these actually show a width dimension. Okay, so all of the lines that I have highlighted are either a width for the yellow or a green for the depth. And then anything else that I don't have highlighted is actually going to be at 90 degrees for the height. So if I took this pink marker and just shaded everything in that was going to be a height dimension, we could see that all these areas in pink are height. And I actually missed one in the depth. This one would also be a depth. Okay? So height dimensions are in pink. The width dimensions are in yellow. And then the depth dimensions would be in the green. Okay? So when we're looking at isometric drawings, sometimes you'll get confused because it'll kind of, the lines start blending in together. So you just have to be real careful and know where you're at on the drawing. Okay, so we're going to start out. This is a metric drawing, so we're going to use our metric scale. So you're going to have to get your metric scale out. Remember, we're using the 1 to 100 scale, which is actually in centimeters, but each little notch here is a millimeter. And my camera's, the zoom is not updating, but each little notch right there, the focus, let's see if it can focus a little bit better.
Metric scale.
Metric scale, each one of those little tick marks is a millimeter. Okay, so if we have 114 millimeters, then on the 1 to 100 scale, that's actually 11.4 centimeters. All right, so on our paper, we're going to put 2 of these objects on this sketch. So we're going to draw one of them starting probably, I don't know, we'll try to start right in here and maybe put the other one up here. We'll see how much room that we have. So you don't have to start it right at the bottom, but maybe 2 or 3 blocks up. And how do we know? Because I'm telling you to start it right there. When you've done a few of these, you'll get to see about where you need to start. For right now, this is your first one, so you just kind of got to trust me on this. And this start point, so I went not quite halfway over, and it looks like 1, 2, 3 squares up. And remember, on isometric paper, you have 3 different lines. One of them is going to the left at 30 degrees, one of them is going to the right at 30 degrees, and then one of them is going straight up. So you just have to kind of remember where you are on your drawing, and you'll see what I mean in just a moment. So this is where we are, right here, okay? So if you want to help yourself out in your visualization, put a little dot here and have your dot on your paper as your start point. The first line that we're going to make is this line that goes back at 114. Okay? So we're going to make this line right here. And that's going to put us at this end point here. So I'm going to be making dots on where we're starting and where we're finishing. So when we finish this line, we're going to be right here. And you're going to see why I'm doing that in just a moment. So I'm lining my scale up. This is very important. You have a grid line that goes back to the left. You're going to line your scale up along that grid line. And you're going to make a line that is 11.4 long along the grid line that goes back at an angle. And it just so happens that we end on another grid line. So you can see my dots. And I went back along that grid line. I'm trying to zoom in so you can see my grid line. Still kind of hard to see, but my grid line goes back in a straight line towards my other measurement point. Once you get those dots, you can go ahead and make your line. Okay. We went 114 millimeters. And that means 11.4 centimeters. So we were here. We went here. Now our next dimension, if we're just following our lines here, our next dimension to box this in is going 38 up. So our next point is going to be up here. So we're going to go up 38, straight up. So this is a height dimension because remember this was pink. And we're going up 38. And on our 1 to 100 scale, 38 is 3.8 centimeters. So we're putting our scale along the line that goes straight up. If we do that correctly, we should still land on a grid line. We went up 38, which is 3.8 on our 1 to 100 scale. So we should land on a grid line. We should have landed on a grid line here and here. So I went back along the isometric line, 114, and I'm going up 38. So this point, where my finger is the same point as this corner here. This point was the point that we got to from that first line. So if you draw a point on your object as you're drawing your lines on your paper, then you're always going to know where you're at. And that might not mean a lot right now, but you'll understand once you get drawing on your own how you can get lost. So the next line that we need to make to box this in is going to be this line here. Okay, we're going to go all the way back to this point at the end right here. So that whole distance, we see that dimension right here is 57. So we were here, we drew a line back, we drew a line up, now we're going to draw a line, and this is a depth dimension because it was green. So we're going to go back to the right, 57. So that's going to be going along this grid line here. Okay, so this 30-degree angle that's going back to the right. And we need to go 57. And on your 1 to 100 scale, that's 5.7. And that should land right on a grid line. So now, if we follow our sequence, we were here, we went straight up, and then we're going back towards the right, that 57 dimension. So now, we're right here on our drawing. Okay? If we want to box this whole thing in, we would come back down this 114. So what that would look like, because we don't actually have a line, if we were boxing all of this in on our paper here, and then we would have to actually make these construction lines that I just drew in. Okay? So we're going to do that just because when you start out in isometric, that's a good thing to do just so you can see it. So we're right here. We know the whole width of this thing was 114. We already have that dimension. We already have that 114. So if we come back to our start point right here, we know that we can draw a line straight up, just like we did here. These two lines should be parallel. Just draw a line straight up And then from this point, you'll come back along that grid line until these two lines meet. So I drew my line straight up. It was a little bit too long, but when I brought this back along the grid line, I know that I can erase some of that. So the great thing about isometric is once your lines start to meet up, you don't have to do a lot of measurement, but it can also get very tricky because you really don't know where you are on the drawing sometimes. So all I did is draw my line straight up, draw this one back along the grid line, and where they meet, I erase down to it.
Perfect.
I'm going to do the same thing going back this way. I'm just going to take, at this point, I'm going to make my line back to the right. I don't really know how far to go, but once I come up here where I actually did measure, I can just bring that line across here in my width. And notice this line is parallel here and this line is parallel. So as long as your lines are parallel, you're okay. And then I know, okay, I need to terminate that line right here, and you can just erase what you don't need. Because we actually measured this line and this line. That's why we could do it that way. If we didn't measure, then of course we couldn't do it that way. So we only have a couple more lines until this is boxed in. So we can do the same thing here. We can take a line straight down, and where this line meets it, we know then that's the corner. So I can erase what I don't need of the line that I brought straight down. So now I have this whole thing boxed in. So remember, this was my front, and you guys don't have to write this on here. I'm going to write it just so you can remember. This was my front, this was my right side, and this was my top. I see width here. I see depth on the right side. And then in the right side and front, I'll see height. So now that I have this boxed in, I can go back in and put in the finer details. So if I start from that same start point in that front corner, I know I can go back 16 and over 38 to get this part right here that's cut out. So I can do that with my scale. I'm going to take my scale and put a 16 dimension right along that line. And 16 is 1.6. Now this one happens not to fall on a grid line. I'm actually right in between grid lines. So I went back 16 here. If you're in between grid lines, the best thing you can do is just keep your lines parallel. You know that here in this pink area where we need to go up, we're going to be at 90 degrees. We don't have a line to follow, but we can keep that parallel. So we're going to measure 19 straight up and down. Okay? So straight up from this line, I'm keeping it parallel to my two grid lines. I'm going straight up. So it should be parallel to this line here. And any grid lines that I'm in between, I just want to keep it straight up. Because that's a height dimension. Mine happens to fall on this grid line. I know that this distance was 16, so I know it just comes right back down along that grid line and meets up here. And I actually don't have to make that line. We won't need that line, so don't make it. You'll end up having to erase it. What this gives us though, what this surface gives us, is we're right here now. So we are on top of the surface where the hole is. So this dot and this dot are the same spot on the drawing. So we do know that we need to go back at 38 here. So if we go back to the right, we're still in between two grid lines. So just to show you what this is going to look like, I want to keep it in between my grid lines when I come. Okay? So I need to keep it parallel to this line, and I need that to be 38. So I'm going to have to actually measure this. It's going to be 3.8. So I kept it parallel to my grid lines. I went 3.8 over. So that puts me right here. So now I'm right here on my drawing. I know that I need to go back down that 19 for this corner. I've already measured that. So as long as I'm staying in between the grid lines, and I could even come here and make this line first if I wanted to, because I know I need to go 38 back in this direction. So it doesn't matter really which one that you make first, as long as where they meet up, that's your corner, where your corner is going to be. So the face that I have right here is this same face that I'm coloring in on the drawing. So this rectangle is this face. And to get this smaller portion, here, we know that we're just going to come back out and make that. So this was 38 or 3.8 on our scale. So now I know that I can come straight out here. I know I can go straight up to where these meet. And then this just ends up going straight over to where the line is already there. So eventually all of our lines start to meet up. You just got to make sure that you're going in the correct direction. That's key. Okay, and don't shade it in like I did. I was just trying to give you a better picture of it on the screen. These are still going to be nice smooth lines like our multi-views. But now you can see this surface, and then then we also have this surface right here, and we also have this surface. And we're keeping our lines parallel. You'll notice the ones with the width dimension are parallel. The ones with the height dimensions, parallel. The ones with the depth, parallel. So now we have the back part of this area that we need to work on. We know that we can come over 19 here and kind of fill in some of this detail. So it would be easiest probably if we started back in this corner and just followed our dimension and went over 19 to get to here. So let's do that. We're going to have to measure this because we don't have it already as a line. So we're going to put our scale along the line that we have and measure over 19. And it should put us on a grid line. So here's my 19 spot, and that puts me right here on my drawing. And I know that I need to come out 28, so that 28 is going to be in this direction, somewhere along this line here. So I'm coming back this direction 28, and I see that from my dimension. So I'm putting my scale along that grid line. I'm measuring 28. So once I have that 28 line, that puts me right here at this corner. And I know, 19 back, so if I'm going to make that top surface there, I've already got my distance. I just need to bring that back this direction. So now I have this surface here. It was 28. And this sheet is in Google Classroom too. If it's hard to see it on the screen, you can open it up and have it on your own. Yeah, I'm sorry guys, I went 3.8 on that last one. So let me fix that. So I went a little bit too far, 1 centimeter too far. So it should actually be right here. So that looks more proportional. All right, so the next dimension that we need to do, because right now we're right here at this corner. So we need to go down 13. So we're going to go straight down, and remember this is a pink one, so it's going to be a vertical line. We're going down 13, which is 1.3 on our scale. So it's straight up and down. Remember that's a vertical line. And once you get it, we know we need to go straight up and down right here too at this adjacent corner. So just try to keep it parallel to your grid lines because mine are landing in between grid lines, so try to keep it parallel. And once you have those lines going straight up and down, then you have a width dimension That should be parallel to the one on top there. So these two are parallel, and then these two are parallel. And from there, it meets up with the frame of our object. So where we boxed it in, we just bring that line all the way out till it reaches the edge here. Now, we can't do that with the other side because remember we have to come back in this direction, that width here. So we come back before we meet it up at that corner. A lot of times people will just try to make this line all the way out to here, and that doesn't work because they'll forget the width. So now we have this face is where I'm shading in on the drawing, and then this face is here. So we got a good bit of this drawing done. We still have one more main surface that we've got to get though. We know that the main surface here is up 19 from the bottom, and we already have that corner. We have that corner made. So we have that surface. We've just got to take our line back. And you'll notice there's a little bit of an area right here that goes up in the height dimension. So we can't just make this line, you know, to the corner there. We have to make sure we keep that little bit of height left too. So the easy way to do that is just make a line straight down here. We're not given that dimension, so we don't know how long to make that line, but we do know that this corner goes back to meet it. So if we were just to draw this corner back at that angle where these two lines are parallel, then we know how much we need to erase off right there. Okay? So we knew that there was just a little bit of a height here, and it should meet up with the surface there. Same thing on this side. We know that this corner is actually this corner on our drawing. We know that goes back. We need to create this line straight down. We don't really know how long that line is because we're not given that dimension. We could do the math if we wanted to, but we don't have to. We'll just make a line straight down here. And where this line comes back along that grid line, where they meet, that's how we know how long that line should be. All these lines should meet up because it's corners of the same object. And then those two corners should meet with a parallel line that's parallel to the depth dimension. And these just happen to fall on a grid line. So I'm darkening in my lines heavily so you can see them on the screen. But remember, your lines are just a nice, smooth, single stroke, darkened line. Your lines are just an object line, not a shaded in line like mine. Okay, so you can kind of see how this object is shaping up. The only thing else that we need is our hole. So in sketching holes, remember, we have to create a box that is the size of the diameter of the hole. and we need to know where the hole is located. So we're given two location dimensions. We're given the 57 and the 28. And then we're given the size of the hole is 22. So the first thing that we would do is measure the 57 and the 28 to get the center, and then we would box in, using our grid lines, the size of that diameter. So to do that, you're going to use your scale. We're going to get that 57 first. So let me darken in some of my lines. And you can kind of, because we no longer need some of these construction lines, we can go ahead and erase part of the box that we initially made to get the height, width, and depth. We don't need all of that anymore. So we can erase some of that out just to get rid of the excess lines. Remember, I'm darkening in just so you guys can see. So to get the location dimensions for the hole, we're going to measure, we're given this 57 from the corner here. I usually just keep my scale at the same point where it's giving me the dimension. That's the easiest thing to do. So from that point, in that corner, I'm going to measure up 57 along that line, and I'm putting a little measurement mark right here. So you can see my little measurement mark. And then from that mark, it's telling me that I need to go in 28. So it actually landed on a grid line, so I'm just going to follow that grid line in with my scale and measure 28, which is the 2.8. So if I make center marks, I need to make them parallel to my grid lines. So remember, all the lines are parallel to the grid line. So that's my center mark for that circle. And I know the diameter of the circle is 22. So if I'm going to box that in, I have to know the radius, because when you create your box, remember we go to either side of the center point, the radius. So that would be 11. So I would just take my scale and do 1.1 on all sides. And just put a little measurement mark there. Make sure that you're keeping it parallel to the grid lines. And you're measuring along the grid lines too. When you're doing your box, the same rules apply. You want it to be a construction line, but you also want it to be parallel to the grid lines. And you'll see why this is an ellipse when you have this box made. So there's my construction box. I could probably do a little bit better job with this line, making it parallel. And then, just like you did with your circles, you'll do a quadrant at a time, and you'll see that when you do the quadrants here, that they are more elliptical. Because two of the quadrants are a lot longer in your arc than the other two quadrants. So now we have a circle. We can erase our construction lines for our box. And the only thing that we would have left is just to clean up our lines and erase our measurement marks and that kind of thing. But that gives us an isometric of figure 831. Okay, for the next one, we're doing figure 832. So if we look at this object, we know that the width, again, is 114. The height on this side was 36, but remember, overall it was 44 because we had to add the 19 here. And then the depth is 64. So on this one, it's going to be a little bit more confusing if we box the whole thing in. So I'm going to show you how we'll start out with the full width, but we'll only go up 36, and we'll go ahead and make this surface, and then we'll come back and start back at the start point to get the rest of this front area. I'm going to use the same paper. So on your paper, we drew the first one right in here. So our second start point can be probably, right in here would give us plenty of room. So we're eyeballing it. We can kind of tell, since we've done one, about how long this is going to be. So we should be able to go back and have plenty of room. We might even be able to go up a little bit on that. So for now, this is okay. We're doing a sketch. These are our first isometrics. So we have our start point. What we want to do is take our metric scale, just like we have been, and we're going to go in this direction to the left, that 114. So the same thing applies. We want to line it up with the grid line. And remember, 114 is 11.4 on the 1 to 100 scale. And so I'm pretty close right here. That's okay. Now, if you're running into it, then you probably do need to move your start point up a couple notches. So you don't want to run into it. So this was my start point. I went back 114. I'm going to go ahead and make that line. And we're on a grid line, so basically you're just following the grid line. So the same thing that we did down here with our start point and our end point. We started here, we went back towards the left along that 30-degree line towards the left and made this line. So before we said we boxed it in, this time we're going to do it a little bit different. Okay, we're not going to box everything in. So before, I still had the dots showing you where to go, but this time we're just going to follow the lines of the object. So right now, we are here. Okay? So this dot and this dot, same spot. So we went 114 millimeters back. And we said we're not going to actually box this in. We're just going to go with the lines that we have. So if we look, this is a 36 dimension going straight up in our height. So we're going to do 36 up from this line. So from this dot, we're going up 36, which is 3.6 on our scale. And that should put us right at a grid line. We're like half a millimeter below that grid line, so just go ahead and go to the grid line. So now that we have our point, we can go ahead and draw our line up. So that puts us on the object, that puts us right here. It was 36, and we're going straight up. So 36, actually, I'm sorry, I went up too far. We're at half a grid line. We should be right at half. Yeah, it's not quite right at half. That's why I went ahead and put it up to that grid line. We're just a little, like a hair below the grid line. So we went up 36. And now if we're following our paper, following our dimensions, we can come back in this direction that's parallel to our first line that we made. We can come back 16 right here. So this time we're not boxing it in, we're just following the lines of our object. So from this point, regardless if you had it at half or on the grid line, it should be like right in the middle of half in the grid line, just a hair shy of a full grid line. But wherever it is, it needs to be parallel to a grid line. So along that parallel, and you can kind of use your scale to make sure you're parallel. Line your scale up parallel to the grid line that's going in the direction you need it to go. And you're going to come back 16, which is 1.6. Okay, so this line and this line should be parallel. And if we look on our paper, now we are right here. So we're right here, right here. And then in order to complete this face of the object, we can go back in our depth 64. And mine may go off the paper a little bit, yours may go off the paper a little bit. That's okay. Just be in line with a grid line, be parallel. So we're going to go 64. It's okay, just keep making it. Just be in line and parallel. And if it goes on your desk, you can erase it. So mine ends up being on the paper, but off the grid part. And that's okay. We could move it and start over and, start somewhere down in here, but we're okay. This is to teach you how to get in the process of doing isometric. So now, if we're looking at where we are, we just made this line. So now we're back in this corner. And we already measured this 16 line. So we can make another one that's parallel out here. And if you're off your paper, you need to make sure. A great way to do this would be to line your scale up and just try to keep it at that same angle as you go. If you're not off your paper, then you're okay because you can follow a grid line. Just make sure that you are parallel. I'm just going to create a line so I know that it's parallel. I'm not measuring anything because I've already measured it here. I just want a line that's parallel to this line. And then whenever I get that line, I know that I could go parallel along the grid line back to meet that line. And that gives me that surface of my object. So once I have those lines, I have this surface completed. So where I'm at, I created this line down, I brought the line up to meet it. So now I have all of that complete. And I know I don't need the rest of my line up here, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it. Since I'm following my dimensions, the next thing to do would be to go down 11. So if I'm at this back corner following my dimensions on my paper, I'm going to go straight down 11. For this is the height dimension, so remember height dimensions are vertical. So back here, I'm on a grid line. If you're not on a grid line, that's okay. You might be just a tad off. I might just be a tad off, but make it parallel to your grid lines nonetheless. And we're going to go down 11, and that's going to be a straight down vertical line because it's your height dimension. And we can go ahead and make that. We can make one straight down here on this corner to make sure you are parallel. We don't even have to measure it because we know that we measured on this side, so as long as we're keeping our lines parallel to our grid lines, we're going to be okay. And we can erase out anything extra. So our grid lines are just there to help us stay parallel. So now what I've done, by going down 11 here, going down 11, lining those up, I have completed this view that's shaded in the green there. So now where I'm at on my object, I'm right here where my finger is and right here where my pencil lead is. So I know my next steps are to come back forward But I really don't know how far to come back forward, and I don't want to do the math, so I'm going to come back down to my start point and work my way back up till I can get the detail in the front here. So doing that, I know I need to go 57 back along my first line that I made, and then I need to go up 10. So from this start point, we're going to measure 57, and we're going to go straight up vertical 10. So we can do both of those measurements. So my first one fell on a grid line, but my second one was in between grid lines. But again, as long as you're staying parallel to the grid line, you're okay. The first one was 57, and that second one was 10. So I don't have to make this line. I'm actually going to erase that line. But I do have to make my vertical line that's straight up. And then we know that it actually comes down and is parallel to this line that we're going to erase. So before we erase it, let's keep it there so we'll stay parallel. I'm putting a little mark so I know how far to come, and this was that 10 mark, and all I did is line it up where it was here. So I can make my line parallel to the line that I already have at that same point. And once I have that, I can erase this if I want to. So all we needed to do right there is just make sure that we're parallel. This little piece that we see here, we will see part of that line. We know it goes back through the object because we've drawn the multi-view of this, but in the isometric we don't show the hidden lines. We just know that it just goes back in that right direction, that right receding line direction, until it hits the line that we just drew. So on our object, we went back 57, we went up 10, we came back down to where it was parallel, and we went ahead and made that small line right here. So right now, we are at a good point where this point and this point are the same. So if you look at my fingers, this point and this point are the same on the object. So our next step, we don't really know what this height is right here. We know from the surface it's up 19, but we really don't have the thickness here. We could calculate it, but we don't have to, because we have a common point. We have this point on our drawing, and we have this point on our drawing. So we know that this point comes in contact with our main surface here. So we're just going to bring that line down and bring this line up until they meet. Now we know that we have a little bit here that we have to create with these little tower details, but for now we're just going to let those meet up so we can measure up 19 from there. So on your grid paper, and again, we're not measuring anything, but if you want to use your scale to kind of keep everything in line, you can do that. Just make sure your scale is parallel. We're just making a line down that is parallel to our other isometric lines. And then from this corner, we said we were going to make a line that was straight up. Now, we don't really know how far that line straight up should go just yet, but we know that from this point here where they meet, this tower, this detail that kind of looks like a tower, is 19 from where they meet. So our measurement start point is actually right here, and we need to measure up from there 19. I'm pretty close to it as it is. Alright, so where we're at now, we have that line that went down here that was 10 up. We just went ahead and drew a line straight up right there. We brought this corner down to meet that line because we know that from that point we needed to measure up 19. So right now we have this corner made, okay? So where my finger is here and where my finger is on the original paper, that's where we're at. So now we can come in here and make these little squares on the top, which are 16 by 16. So from this point, we're going to go all the way around and make a 16 square. So the key is to stay in line with your grid lines. That's 16 on this side. Since I'm at a corner and on a grid line from here, I'm going to go and do the other side first. And then, of course, they're going to meet up, so as long as I'm parallel, I only have to do 2 measurements. So right now I'm only going to do the 1, and then I'm going to work my way over and do the other side. Because I know from this corner, it's going to go straight down to meet that surface. So as long as I'm parallel to my grid line, I can come down to meet the surface that I already have. I know that I need to erase some of this out. So we can really see it start shaping up as the object. Again, I'm really darkening mine in so you can see it. You guys just need to do one smooth straight line. Okay, the next thing that we need to do, we need to figure out where we are on our paper. We have this line that we brought straight down to meet the surface that we already brought over, so we're good there. The next best thing to do, we have this corner. We have the corner that's common here on our sketch paper and the corner on the original. So we know that we can go over this full 64 to get that whole depth right there. And then once we do that, we'll go straight up with a line. But we're going to measure that 64 first. And when you're measuring, just make sure that you are staying parallel, because isometric lines are parallel. So I went over my 64. One thing that's going to really help me out is I already have this made. So a lot of these dimensions I can just transfer up once I get to that same surface. So for right now, what I'm going to do, I know I need to go straight up from this corner. So I'm going to go straight up and stay parallel. I don't really know how far I need to go straight up, but I'm going to just be parallel lines straight up. And I can see where my grid line is. And if you're not right on a grid line with this line, then just make it parallel with your straight edge, and you can see where this line is and where it should meet over here. So I'm just taking that. I'm not measuring anything right now. I'm just making a line straight out to where if I did come all the way straight out, it would meet this one, because I know that's my height. I don't have to measure anything when I know the line is in line with it. So anything excess, I can erase. So in isometric, use your resources, use your heights that you've already measured. So now I'm at the right height. I know that I need to make a line parallel to these two lines in that same direction that they're going. I don't know how far to make them, but I know I need a line that's parallel, so I'm just keeping it parallel with my grid lines. And then I'm looking to see where this line is, because that's going to give me my distance. And I'm just making sure I'm staying parallel, because I'm not on grid lines at this point. So right now I haven't really measured anything. I'm just using parallel lines on the grid lines, and I'm lined this line up with this surface here. And then I'm erasing the excess. So far, I have measured nothing. So far, I did measure over 64. I made a line straight over. I made sure it matched up with this line. And then I made a line back to the left along the grid line. I made sure it matched up with this line. Now the one thing that I'm going to have to do is measure the 16 that I need to come back this way, because I really don't have any lines that I can match up. So I'm coming back this way 16. So I'm making sure I'm putting my scale along that line and putting my 16 mark. And then this line that I'm getting ready to make is going to be parallel to these two lines and the line back here. now my square ends up where it's supposed to be. And I can erase out any excess lines that I may have had. So to catch us up where we are on our paper, we went up here, we brought these lines over, transferred them, so now we have this surface and this surface. So the point where we're at now is right here, which is the same point on my object on my paper. And we're going to go straight down to where this surface meets. So one way that we can help ourselves with this surface, we already had a point where we brought that surface here. We know that we can bring that straight back too. And so if you've erased it so much that you can't see it, you might want to bring that back just by lining up your straight edge with the line that you already made and putting yourself a little notch right there. If you still have it, then you simply line up your straight edge with a parallel to the line going back in this direction, and just lightly draw you a line in there, because you're not going to need all of it, but you will need it to know where to bring this corner down to. So this corner goes down to that line, and this corner does the same thing. So as long as you're staying parallel, you're good. And you don't really need the excess in here, so we just trim that out. We need to do the same thing with this back corner where we see it. Just making a line down. I know that it's going to line up with the corner that I just made. So as long, we don't know how, well, we do know it's 19, but we don't really have to measure it. We know that we can just bring that line down. It lines up with this corner, so we bring our line up to meet it. And we can erase the excess. So now we have this part. And for the sake of time, we're not really going to do the holes on this one. We'll skip the holes, but we do have one more line to finish us out, and it's from this corner down. So this corner needs to meet our little tower piece over here on the right. My lead keeps breaking. So like I said, for the sake of time, right now we won't do the holes. That's what we have. When we do this in an isometric on our drawing sheet that we'll pick up tomorrow, we will put the holes, so we'll end up having to measure and get those intersections then. So we won't be missing out on it.